Hi, David Oliphant, founder of Ocean Blue Real Estate, and welcome back for another version of Living Locally. Last month, we were fortunate to meet the homeowner of this beautiful coastside cottage in Moss Beach, but this month, we get to talk to the landscape designer, Daniel Nolan. Let's go inside and talk.
About 4 or 5 years ago, I was approached by a friend of mine who was building a property out here. Well, he basically said, you can do whatever you want. We're not going to do irrigation and it'll sort of be your canvas. And that was sort of the introduction to Moss Beach. I discovered the area, really loved it. The climate is really lovely. The people are really friendly. And now I have my studio here.
When you were thinking about planting this garden, obviously climate came to mind. Tell us about some of the adjustments you had to make for that.
The largest one was that my client didn't want to spend the resources on irrigating or any sort of planning in that regard. So we wanted to really increase the diversity of plants that could accommodate such low water requirements. And we really looked to different parts of the world. So there's a lot of plants from South Africa, from Australia, from New Zealand, who have a similar climate, but basically just the opposite hemisphere. And they adapted just beautifully to this environment.
So that makes me think of your book,
Yes.
Dry Gardens. That's quite the opposite of Moss Beach. How did that play out here?
Well, I think that there's so many different variations of dry. We do forget that even though we live in a somewhat moisture-rich environment, the sand here, the sandy soil, really contributes to a lot of plants that would not necessarily thrive in, say, drier climates like, Arizona or Southern California. So we look to a lot of California natives, but also, again, those Australian, South African plants that just perform really well.
Can you help our viewers understand a little bit more what a microclimate in the Bay Area means and how that might impact some of the plant life?
Sure. So I've been designing gardens in San Francisco for almost 10 years. And even in San Francisco, there are climates that vary within less than a mile. The same thing is down in the peninsula. So I usually ask clients or anyone that's interested in a garden exactly where you live, because the climate on one side of PCH or Highway 1 is vastly different than on the other side. That has a lot to do with the conditions coming off the ocean, but also elevations, how much fog gets captured, how fast the fog burns off. So there's a lot of different factors determining your microclimate. And usually, it's sort of like the forecast. When you say that it's raining in the city, but you go 5 miles west, and it's dry, that, there's all sorts of contributing factors.
We've been in the Bay Area those same 10 years. Have you seen those microclimates change at all? We hear a lot about global warming. Is that a thing?
Yeah, plants that we were bringing up sort of experimentally from Southern California, from other growers, from other places that had sort of unusual plants, we were treating them as sort of a novelty 10 years ago. And then we've realized that not only have they established that they've thrived, and a lot of plants that were here planted maybe in the 50s and 60s are declining because we don't have the same temperature, we don't have the same water, rainfall that we used to. So plants like hollies, rhododendrons, azaleas are essentially being just sort of minimally withdrawn from gardens every year because they decline. So we're replacing them with, maybe more exciting material, but definitely plants that were not here 10 years ago.
Imagine I'm a new homeowner and feeling very overwhelmed. Either my garden is completely empty or it's completely overgrown. I have no idea where to begin. What's your advice?
My advice would be to objectively look at your garden and determine what is doing the best. So if it is a specimen tree, if it is a hedge, if there is something that is essentially creating the bones or the foundation, that is what you need to focus on, and everything should be about enhancing that. Everything else that is sort of added, or maybe you have one or two of, should really be pulled back or eliminated, because that is sort of a distraction. You really want to find some unity and harmony in sort of creating a collaborative space. And usually a lot of people will go to the nursery and just pick 4 different things when you really need 20 of one thing. So I usually tell people, it's not going to be the longest plant list, but it's going to be pretty concise, and that's really what you want to do to make your space look designed.
Is that also possible if I've spent my entire budget on my home and have a very limited budget for my yard?
It is. Less is more, and also be patient. So, everything that we planted here was pretty small going in. We had a pretty modest budget, but we knew that things were going to adapt and grow really quickly. So I would just really refine your plant selections. And maybe if you were to say, I would want to add a few more things, pull back and actually purchase maybe a few more of the items that you are already adding to the garden.
Speaking of plant choices, I hear you have a thing for succulents.
I do. I love succulents. I think there are a lot of ways that they add instant architecture to spaces. You do not need a full succulent garden, but maybe 3 agaves or a couple aloes really will create some sort of form and create corners and space in a garden. And sometimes gardens really need a little bit of structure, and they're just super amendable. You can plant them and sort of neglect them, and they're wonderful. So I always say I'd much rather plant an agave over a rose.
And looking at our microclimate for the next 10 years, those will do well?
Yeah, the forecast is that Northern California is going to start having a climate much more like Southern California in the next 50, 60 years. So things are only going to get drier, a little less fog. So we should really be looking into plants that can sustain those sort of changes and adapt to those sort of realities.
What comes to mind that I might be forgetting to ask you that our viewers would be interested in?
I would say we are very fortunate to live in such an area where there is such plant diversity. So if you are sort of feeling stuck with your garden, to drive around your neighborhood or even take a walk and really just sort of pay attention to what is in your neighbor's gardens or in your surroundings, because that really sort of helps you gain some sort of design direction when you're in the nursery or when you're making your next plant choice.
Tell our viewers where they can find your book, Dry Gardens.
It's available at most bookstores in the Bay Area and nationwide. It's on Amazon, anywhere you choose to find or purchase your books. And locally, Flora Grub Gardens carries a large selection of my book and other books that are in that sort of vein.
We appreciate your time. Thanks for being here. Ocean Blue Real Estate is very proud of the fact that this year we are the exclusive sponsors of the Maverick Surf Awards. So therefore, the VW bus got a new wrap. I hope you've enjoyed this version of Living Locally. As always, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.